Hello and welcome to our 200th episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
Hi, I'm Larry.
I'm Nicole.
David.
And I'm Josh. For this 200th episode of our show, which it's remarkable that we've made it to this point, we asked we asked different people that took part in the show to nominate works that we've gone over that we would revisit, and then we put up the top choices up for vote, and Howl got the most votes. Howl was our 5th discussion that we filmed on our show. It was episode 5, but to be honest, I felt that there was so much more that we could explore with Howl. Nicole was on the original discussion back in season 1, and we definitely had to have Dr. Bordelon on this discussion because he was the one that introduced myself and Nicole to Howl by Allen Ginsberg. And then we have Larry, who always offers an interesting perspective. So, Dr. Bordelon, you have a discussion starter for?
Yeah, sure. It's a question, I guess, for readers on the panel, and I guess for anyone who's looking online. So this poem was written in the 1950s. Eisenhower's president. You know, we have, supposedly, according to television, we have husbands and wives sleeping in separate beds. We have women cooking dinner in cocktail dresses and pearls. And, yeah, we have very staid, conformative lifestyle, and then we have this poem hits the scene, and we think, well, how much impact could a poem written in the 50s have today? So I always ask, you read the poem, were you shocked? Does this poem still have the capacity to shock, even though it's written again in the 1950s? It
shocks, and then every time you read it again, something else pops up.
It's and you know what it is too is the expressive nature of the poem, and obviously the language, and all of these things that were very aggressive for the 50s, and I still find that some of the ideas and the language and the way that he's kind of just spilling it all on the page is still really shocking to people who aren't familiar with literature that has no boundaries, as they were saying before. And if you've only ever been exposed to the cookie cutter, what's approved in school, and you've never ventured to the banned bookshelf, then this is especially shocking.
That's what with poetry, to me, I thought it was all about the mahogany chestnut tree
she walks in
corner of the street. Right. But then you hear something like who let themselves be fucked in the ass by saintly motorcyclists and screamed with joy, and these images about just
of drug use,
intercourse, genitals.
Yeah, really glorifying it. Yeah, and so what do you guys think about that? Why would he include drug use? Why would he include? I'm so glad you read that first, because I make the mistake oftentimes of banned book day at the college where I teach, and I will oftentimes make the mistake of saying, "Oh well, I'll read from Howl." And the problem with that is, while I love the work, I own the collected works of Allen Ginsberg. I've read several biographies of his. I've read several of his journals and letters. So I really love his work. I am still embarrassed to read it out loud. So here I am standing in front of a group of college students reading. I find it hard to say it right now. So reading the poem. And again, it still has that capacity to shock. So why is he doing this? Why is he including this kind of language, which I think people know of? It's not that it's not there. I mean, we have in the 1700s William Wordsworth, the Romantic era, writing and saying that he wanted to make poetry, bring poetry to the masses in a sense, right? But his way of doing that was to use to kind of move from that very strict kind of poetic diction to a more informal dialect, writing poems, as a matter of fact, in the Yorkshire dialect, right, in that dialect. So why do you think, and that's a hint, by the way, why do you think Ginsberg is using this kind of language? Is it merely a shock, in other words? I'll put it that way. Is it merely just to say, wow, look at me, look at me, look at me?
Because I think he believes that everybody is entitled to equal representation.
I don't think he's thinking that hard about it. I think it's more of an emotional kind of rejection of order. I think it's
that. I think it's
I think it's that, and I think it's coupled with the rejection of order and the incorporation of these are the desires of the mind and the body and the soul, and they're also taboo. So let's not necessarily remove the taboo, because it's still very much taboo even in written text, but this is his way of simultaneously rejecting the norm and embracing what has been rejected for so long. And I think that using that diction and that language and the focus on hallucinogenics and intercourse and illegal activities and looking at it from a standpoint of well, these are just the flesh desires, and is that wrong? But in a society where it has so likely been deemed unacceptable to approach it so openly, kind of throws the audience for a loop.
Right, and also makes it, I think, more acceptable. He's writing from that strong American strand of like a Whitman-esque strand, where Whitman says, I'm the poet of the body and I'm a poet of the soul. So he's connecting to both. And Whitman has that great line where he says, the scent of these armpits is aroma finer than prayer. So there he is quite literally conjoining the body and pretty much one of the grossest parts of the body. Yeah, but itself is divine, but think of that. He's saying it's aroma finer than prayer. So there he's suggesting it in itself, the body in itself is transcendent. And he's not saying the forehead, he's not saying the hand, he is saying the armpit. In other words, something that we think of as gross. 19th century too, they didn't have a lot of antiperspirants and they didn't shower every day. So when they say the scent of my armpits is aroma finer than prayer, you can imagine there's some reeking going on,
Whitman was from New Jersey too.
Yeah,
they often call that the armpit.
Yeah, there you go. So how perfect is that? And then to bring in New Jersey again, but to bring up New Jersey,
because Ginsberg's also.
Yeah, Ginsberg is from New Jersey. Ginsberg had been corresponding with William Carlos Williams, who's a famous American poet. At the time, and in fact, Williams wrote an introduction to Howl when it was first published, and I think it says, I might be paraphrasing, but I'm getting pretty close to it. In this introduction, Williams says, hike up your underpants, ladies, you're in for a ride, or something like that. So he's like, this is this famous American icon. At the time he had written Patterson, was well respected as a poet. And he's, kind of warning people. And he is fully embracing this kind of American voice, this voice of this person speaking the language of the streets. In this volume, I think there's a quote from Ginsberg himself, and he talks about he's using this kind of language. He says it's the language you use with your friends. Like, you're going to curse when you're talking with your friends, you're going to curse, you're going to talk about sex, you're going to do all these things if it's close friends. And he says to not use that language in your poetry means you're somehow not...
You're embarrassed.
Yeah, well, it's like the muse. He calls it the muse. He says you're not feeding the muse correctly. You're not really opening yourself to the muse.
Right.
So poetry just needs to encompass everything, encompass it all.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's the way he kind of overwhelms the audience too with all of it. He's not easing anyone into anything. You're jumping right into the deep end of this language. And you're jumping right into the deep end of these ideas. And at first when I was reading it, I was picking apart line by line by line, and I was confusing myself, trying to make sense of every little detail. And then I had to kind of zoom out and say, no, this isn't one line at a time. This isn't, there's many allusions and there's many points being made, but it's one idea that he's following throughout this poem. And once you kind of can get over the language and the imagery in each specific line and zoom out to view the whole kind of dialogue and the whole monologue that he's put together here, you really get a sense of why he did this in the first place, why he went to this extreme to get his ideas across of, this is what society expects, but is it what we want? Is it where we're headed? Is this the direction we're going? And if we do head in that direction of societal norms and different expectations, where will we end up because of it?
So does he say, we're all going to be crazy? Because you look at the famous first line, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. Interesting, in early drafts, instead of hysterical, he had mystical.
Mm-hmm.
Which I would think mystical would work better. I mean, because then that would tie in like the whole body-soul dynamic, the idea of the shaman-esque, the person that needs to get into some other out-of-body experience to achieve transcendence would fit perfectly for this
I
poetry.
do think that mystical, however, contradicted the idea of being destroyed, because mystical kind of brings about this idea of overall enlightenment in a positive manifestation, and he's not depicting the positives of enlightenment here. He's depicting the negatives of being dragged through these expectations and ideals, and he's saying that this generation was destroyed by it. So to then, do I contradict myself?
Right,
I contradict myself.
Right.
So I think to do that early on in the poem, while he does make contradictions throughout, I think it would have kind of immediately backtracked his ideas of this destruction of the mind to reach a mystical standpoint is a positive enlightenment. And hysterical brings it more down to the ground level, I think.
Yeah, because the mystical kind of has a notion of transcendence about it that I don't think would be appropriate for what he's going for there, because he's talking about people breaking.
In the whole first part of the poem, correct?
Yes.
The whole first part of the poem is about destruction, and then of course at the end of the poem, you get the joining together. You have "I'm with you" in Rockland, and here he's talking about Carl Solomon, who a real person who exactly in an asylum at the time. I think he was out of the asylum, but he's saying he's still projecting himself into that. I'm with you in Rockland. In my dreams, you walk dripping from a sea journey on the highway across America, in tears to the door of my cottage in the western night. And this is so great because he's walking from New Jersey, Rockland, to San Francisco, all the way across the country. So to me, it just makes it such an American poem. And he's talking about the water, so it's like a baptism. It's almost like he's being cleansed as he's walking across. Just brilliant use of the imagery.
Yeah, in Beats era, because Kerouac did that with On the Road, where he engaged in many of
transcontinental trips.
Yeah, sure. It's the journey. Yeah, sure. It's the journey. It's how do you and how it's almost like a cleansing, I guess, right? That you somehow become renewed through this journey. Now, you had brought up earlier, I was so glad you said that you don't read it like line by line. You need to take a step back and read the whole, because if you notice the whole first part, you have almost 80 lines basically, and that's where the first period occurs. So I wanted to go back to something, I introduced the poem talking about it's in the 50s, everything's seemingly so good. We're living in the post-war years. All our competitors around the world are bombed into submission, so consumerized, manufacturing-wise, we are on a boom, right? Everything is good for us. Why then are we destroyed by madness? When he says, I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, what's the madness? How can it be mad when everything is so good?
Because it's not. Because it's a artificial kind of good, like the Velveeta that's become, and the cheese whiz that's becoming popular.
No, I don't think so. I think it's more related to the West still trying to come to terms with Nietzsche's proposition about the death of God and the horrors of World War I and World War II and all the psychological impact of that on our culture, trying to reconcile that. I think that is what the madness is. And I think that's what drives the phenomenon that we see within the counterculture. From everything, including the rise of the Hells Angels, to beats and the illicit drug use, the sex, all of that is trying to come to terms with what do we do now that we have postulated the idea that God is dead.
But I also feel that there's an issue with the authorities and the people that in some way rebel against the common grain.
That is an aspect of it. That is an aspect of the death of God. Because when you have God, you don't have to think about those kinds of things. You just do what's expected. You just go through your life doing what's expected.
Well, it's conformity then, which is one of the things he mentions in line 56. He says, who were burned alive. He's talking about like people, these people who were burned alive in their innocent flannel suits on Madison Avenue amid blasts of leaden verse and the tanked-up clatter of the armed regiments of fashion. So there he's picking up on the man in the gray flannel suit, that archetypal 50s image of the ad man, you know, what later became the madman. As we saw in the series, the AMC series, that was just the veneer. That really wasn't the real person. But and there's some other things going on with the madness.
Yeah, I think that too. I think that the madness is because I mentioned this before. I think that Ginsberg is taking a juxtaposed stance on what's considered normal and what's considered abnormal, and he's kind of highlighting here that the madness, these things driving people over the edge, are what's expected to be normal. Grow up, go to college, go to work, get a job. This societal norm, this industrialization, this conformity, all of this is what's expected, but it's also what's leading people over the edge. And the line immediately following the one you just read is one that really stood out to me in the poem. He says, who jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge, this actually happened, and I have it highlighted because the fact that he put that in there was so, it was such like a cue to the reader, but who jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge, this actually happened, and walked away unknown and forgotten into the ghostly days of Chinatown, soup alleyways, and fire trucks, not even one free beer. So for all the suffering and all of the emotional and personal turmoil that society is putting people through, I think that's the madness. I don't think it's the drugs and the sex and the alcohol driving people crazy. I think that's the reprieve from the craziness of everyday life.
Good. So it's a way out.
Yeah.
You don't even get one free beer.
Not even one free beer.
Like the beer is like a way of getting that.
That's what. Yeah, and that the way he's going through this turmoil. He tries to take his own life. He's unsuccessful and comes back out unknown to anyone around him. That he just tried to take his own life. It's just completely no one there. No one to help, no one to turn to, not even one free beer, not even one final piece of relief. And I read that and I was like, as soon as I saw him say this actually happened, I had never noticed before that's kind of like a break in the fourth wall. That's reading the poem and turning to you and saying, pay attention.
I want to get Larry circle back to one of the things you said. You brought up Nietzsche and you brought up that existential sense of dread/death. And I think one of the things we forget, and it struck me just a few years ago when I realized we've now had a whole generation, my kids, you guys as well, you didn't grow up thinking that one day you might wake up and be a pile of radioactive dust. Correct? You did not have to wake up with that.
Right.
I grew up thinking that at any point we could have drop of a hat. One morning we could wake up, nuclear bombs had dropped, and we would all just be roasting, or we'd be slowly dying from radioactive poisoning. So when he says madness, I think one of the things he's talking about is this broader kind of societal madness. He would argue too much of an embrace of Nietzsche. Like these people are just think that that it's okay to live in this kind of world. Like, it's fine to live with this existential sense of dread always over your head. And he said, help me pick up on this. On line 15, there's that famous line where he says, who sank all night in submarine light of Bickford's, floated out and sat through the stale beer afternoons and desolate fugazis, which is kind of, you're just kind of living your life, you're not really doing anything. But listen, what do you have? You have listening to the crack of doom on the hydrogen jukebox. So I love, you're talking about the juxtapositions. Isn't it great? You have the work a day, every day. You're going to a cafeteria, but sitting in the back of your mind all the time is that a bomb could come down and destroy all life on the planet.
Right.
So what is crazier than that? That is just completely crazy. And I think that's the madness. And as you said, one way of getting out of that madness is to resort to drugs, is to do something to break kind of that lock.
Right. And you see this kind of progression, and that's why, again, with the zooming out, but he says, with dreams, with drugs, with waking nightmares, alcohol, and cock and endless balls, incomparable blind streets of shuddering cloud and lightning in the mind, leaping toward poles, Canada and Patterson, illuminating all the motionless world of time between. So he's saying, like, there are these two realities. There's this, real life that's taking place, and then there's this escape behind it with the dreams and the drugs and all of these escaping qualities. But he doesn't start to go back into the mention of those drugs or hallucinogenics or escapes. He continues down with kind of filling you with those realities of the hydrogen jukebox, talking 70 hours from park to pad to bar to Bellevue to museum, a lost battalion of platonic conversationalists. He goes on and on about the drear and the drudge of this everyday life. And then when he really starts to break back in to those existential and unexpected bodily desires, that's when he really inundates you with, these are the things that the heart, the soul, the mind, the body maybe wants, but is so unaccepted.
Yeah, I think it's really the quest for meaning is what it's about.
Oh, sure.
That the absence of God will unleash, because where do you get it then? You know what I mean? And that's what the Beats are trying to do. I feel like is they're running around looking for what's the point? What is all this for? What are we doing?
I think that has a lot of reflection on the title of the poem, which I know that Dr. Bordelon has asked that as one of his discussion starters in his own classes, why it's called Howl and not rant or scream or shout, which
I think too, and this is something that I picked up on just in my own mind, and it could be accurate or it could be the weirdest, craziest idea. But I think of the word howl and I immediately think of wolves, right? And wolves only howl to connect to other packs.
Yeah, sure. It's a social instinct.
It's a social instinct. It's something that they do for locational purposes, for purposes of safety and security. They warn when they're predators. If they're lost and separated, they howl. If someone like a loved member of the pack is lost, they howl. So there's all of these kind of deep-seated emotional reasons why wolves howl. And when you go through the poem and you realize that this is kind of in many ways the same similar outcry. So like you were saying, that the Beats are very much their own pack, and it's like a call out to other like-minded individuals who are either going through the same turmoil or, having the same transcendent experiences in life, searching for the same outlets. And one line that stuck out to me after I made that connection was in the third part of the poem, when he's speaking to Carl Solomon in the insane asylum. He says, "I'm with you in Rockland, where we are great writers on the same dreadful typewriter." And it just called to me about that idea that, like, we are one and the same, we're like-minded, we're, I'm with you in this. But that idea of on the same dreadful typewriter is, that going back to that idea of, like, this same societal confounds. Like, we are great writers stuck here in this place where there's no true escape. There's these superficial escapes that we're searching toward. There's these escapes of the body and of the mind, but when the drugs wear off and the sex is over, we're right back to where we were in society with these issues. And it was really powerful to me to understand that connection, that pack mentality, that longing to be with someone so like yourself, and to see that it's kind of, as much as he is embracing that idea, he's also understanding that it's only a temporary fix.
So it's also picking up, and it by connecting it to a wolf, it picks up on the animal nature. So it shows again that we are animals. So yes, we're able to create a hydrogen bomb, but inside of we're still an animal with animal instincts, and these instincts are not to be covered up, but they're meant to be celebrated.
Yes.
And that's what you bring up at the end. And if we could just stop and just take a look at the whole Moloch section. The poem is divided into 3 sections. The first part, as you said, kind of examines, examines like what are part of the problem.
The people that in Ginsberg's generation were destroyed by madness.
Right, and are destroyed by society, destroyed by life at the time. And as you said, he's calling out to them. So he's in a sense acknowledging them, and as you said, pulling in like-minded people. And then you get to the Moloch, and Just a question for you guys. What is Moloch? It doesn't, I mean, it's from the Bible, figure from the Bible, but it doesn't seem like it's any one thing. It seems like it's kind of a moving target. So what do you guys think are some of the things that could be Moloch? What could Moloch kind of represent?
The definition that I picked up was a biblical name of Canaanite god that was associated with child sacrifice.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I think it's more of a moving target along the lines of the idea of sacrifice, not necessarily technically religious. But I think that everything that you go through in this section is what one person is giving up to gain another. Like Moloch, whose mind is pure machinery. Moloch, whose blood is running money. Moloch, whose fingers are 10 armies, whose breasts are a cannibal dynamo. Like those are all things that when you are
Things
part
that make America great, believe
Things
it or
that
not.
make it
These
great,
are all
yeah.
things that lie at the heart of the American century. Our
They
military, our power, Hoover Dam, we have all these things. These are the things that are making America strong, but yet he's saying it's Moloch. It is eating our children. It is eating us alive.
And the fact of the matter is we're all God's children,
Mm-hmm.
and this is a God that's willing to sacrifice specific children that they don't feel fit for the society. And there was a mention, something that I questioned, was Moloch, whose name is the mind.
Mm-hmm.
The mind.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
makes it a train of thought.
Right. So it's
And
not just concrete, it's not just aluminum, it's the vision that wants that, and it's the vision that thinks the business of America is business, right? As so many people still feel today, And we're much more than that, and humans are much more than
Right,
that.
and I agree. I think it was such a time of industrialization and growing in America, and I think what he's trying to say is, like you said, like these things are making our country strong, but what are they doing to our children? What are what are the ramifications of moving in this direction? And he says later in the poem, line 83, Moloch, whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows, whose skyscrapers stand in the long streets like endless Jehovah's. Moloch, whose factories dream and croak in the fog. Moloch, whose smokestacks and antenna crown the cities. Like this is
I wrote down that same line.
yeah, because that's the
Reminds me of Elizabeth.
that's what
Eleanor.
royalty to them. Like that is what it is. And he says later in the poem, Moloch, whom I abandoned, wake up in Moloch. So, as much as we try to leave these ideals, or as much as we try to stray away from the direction that this is heading, how far do we get before we're pulled back in? How far can we, how well can we set up our Thoreau cabin in the woods before this is where we end up again?
Right. Oh, great connection, yeah. And then the poem, of course, ends with this ecstasy, this ecstatic moment. And
Holy
it depends,
ecstasy.
it depends on where you want to end it. I mean, realistically, it ends, or in the book, it first ends with, the section 3 on with Carl Solomon, and it just has that great line, which I've already read, about that sense of a cleansing. But then he adds a footnote. There's a point that he has to add, in a sense, to I guess, make it clear what he thinks his vision of the poem is, because he believes, and he says this in interviews, he believes the poem is essentially optimistic. It's a hymn to the possibilities of man. It's a hymn against the hydrogen jukebox.
Right.
It's a hymn against Moloch.
And I think it's one of those things, again, where, the first verse, which seems to be the most negative, that's just laying the groundwork. That's not him necessarily saying that that's how things should be, or that's how things should stay, but it's him laying the foundation of this is what is going on. These are the many issues, these are the many, pluses and minuses of our society at this moment, and then he moves on to show how those can progress in a positive manner.
Yeah, sure. And then so he starts, as you said, let's go to this beginning, and we'll go to the beginning of footnote. So he says, there's a destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked. Then footnote to Howl opens with holy, 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 just a string of holy. So complete opposite, right? He's trying to show.
I was reading this to myself
Yeah,
for preparation, and
yeah.
I think I need a drink of water.
Yeah, exactly.
And he goes on, the world is holy,
Good.
the soul is holy, the skin is holy, the nose is holy. So all of these things that
You got to read the next one.
seem very uplifting, and then the tongue and cock and hand and asshole holy, like
Right.
every part no less than any other.
That very much an updating of Whitman, where
Yeah.
Whitman couldn't say cock and balls are holy, he can. So
Right. And he
Whitman
will.
had to go with the armpit, but he'll go direct. And notice, I think it's
We're going to
interesting.
go directly to the asshole.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's like the two different match games.
Yeah. And then it's also genitals and it's also generative. So he's dealing with the sex organ in the sense it's both pleasure, but it's also birth. I mean, it's how you procreate, how you create more. Yeah. And then that great
Not
last
with those
line.
organs.
Well, I don't know. He does say, you're right, he is picking up on some things, but he is, I think, the overall idea is picking up on sexuality. Sexuality is something good.
And I think this part where he alludes to himself, which is
Good point to learn.
wonderful. The typewriter is holy, the poem is holy, the voice is holy, the hearers are holy, the ecstasy is holy.
Yeah.
So he's saying, all parts of this puzzle, me and you and everyone engaged in this experience, like, this is not a degrading experience. This verbiage that we mentioned early on, this is not meant to make anyone feel low. This is meant to uplift you in your natural state of who you are.
Oh, you just reminded me of something. I heard on the radio, Brian Stevenson. He wrote a fantastic book on justice, and the name is escaping me right now. Brian Stevenson, and the reason why he's in the news is he just opened up a park, a monument to lynching in Montgomery, Alabama. So that opened up, I guess, about a month ago, and it's been widely covered. And what's interesting, he said, it's not. He said people are afraid to confront this because they're going to feel that they're going to get blamed.
Right.
Like in all whites, I can't talk about lynching because that means I'm somehow responsible. He says it's not that at all. He says you have to accept it so you can move past it.
Right.
Like until you accept it, you're still going to just be stuck with the I'm afraid.
Right, and
So you have to get
there's
past
no
that.
more walking on eggshells here, and that's what I think he's trying to get across as well.
Final thoughts?
Yeah, what do we do about Ginsberg and the pedastry and all that horror? Yeah, he is a NAMBLA member.
Yeah, he did talk about that. It's rough that you bring that up at the end. It's like you're almost waiting on that. So I think we'd have to save that for another discussion.
But then again, also, he wouldn't be the only one. You could say Whitman would belong in that group. Lewis Carroll, Mark Twain, Edgar Allan Poe. Someone even says Robert Louis Stevenson, who had interest in people who were underage.
Yeah, it's something.
I don't know if it's, not that I'm condoning it in any way, shape, or form, but I don't know if it's so easy to examine from our viewpoint because of how different our societal expectations and ideals are from some of those time periods. Ginsberg was rather close to, I think, the same societal expectations, but, Whitman is coming from a whole other time period, and I think that to really be able to delve into the implications of how that affected their work, which is probably what I'd be interested in discussing, would take a lot of digging on my
Like
part.
I said, it'd take like a whole nother, I'd have to, because I wasn't thinking of that coming in, so you asked a question and it's hard for me to formulate an answer.
Yeah, I would want to be able to educatedly.
Yeah.
Educatedly.
It's something
in an
that I just
educated
happened
way.
to, it's something I just happened to come across this morning.
Right.
I wasn't even sure I was going to bring it up. But
Right,
it's
right.
like, I mean,
Something that sticks with your mind.
It seems to me that could be a topic for an entire show. How do you deal? You have T.S. Eliot with his anti-Semitism. You have Ezra Pound, who is making anti-American threats, broadcasts, propaganda broadcasts for the Italians during World War II. So that's like the whole thing. What do you do
when you
with
separate
people?
the artist
Yeah. How do you do that? That'd be a great actually topic for Literary Gladiators. How do you do that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
It would be, it would definitely make for
Yeah.
a decent.
I want to end it though on a different note. Footnote to Howl, the very last line. So this is to me the last line of the entire poem is "Holy the supernatural, extra brilliant, intelligent kindness of the soul." That's the note he wants us to get away on. That's the note he wants us to leave on. So again, moving from madness, the hydrogen jukebox, from Moloch, from being in an insane asylum, to intelligent kindness of the soul.
Definitely puts an emphasis on love thy neighbor.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't. It puts an emphasis on the fact that this is supposed to be a positive, transcendent experience. This is supposed to be literally, this is like the original started from the bottom, and now we're here.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what he's going through. He's taking us from these really aggressively what seemed like negative comments in the beginning when you're reading it at first to this evolution through humanity, through a coming together, through that, call out to thy neighbor, and ending it with that, that incorporation of everyone is good and can be, and we need to find and commit to that.
Everybody can be, but not everybody is.
Yeah.
And I think that focusing on one side of something without looking at the other, like the soul is kind, but the soul is also cruel.
But I don't think he avoids that.
Oh, yeah,
he definitely talks about that. I just think that what he wants people to take away is that the soul is not only cruel.
Yeah,
The
walk
soul,
away from Nietzsche.
yeah. I think he does. I think he does a real great job of excavating every part of the body and discussing the many facets of human existence, from the physical to the emotional to the mental. But I think he wants to end on the knowledge that, above all the negative are the goodnesses in people. Maybe there's not goodness in everyone, maybe there's not goodness in everything, but it can be found and should be held in higher regard than all of the negative.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, you just have to be conscious of everything, or as much of it as you can, right? Because then otherwise it becomes too ideological. That's not good.
Well said. Ready? If you're interested in checking out Allen Ginsberg's poetry, I have the collected poems of Allen Ginsberg, 1947 to 1997. This features everything that he has written as far as poetry is concerned.
I have this version. Dr. Bordelon and I both have it. It's Howl, and it's the 50th anniversary edition, and it's got edits from other authors, letters to and from correspondence, and it has footnotes made by Allen Ginsberg with explanations to all of the allusions and different commentary in the poem. And you can also kind of see the evolution of the poem because it incorporates all of the drafts, so you can see how the first drafts changed over time and his deliberate vocabulary and all of these, conscious changes made to make this work what it is. So I highly recommend that as well.
I have one other book. This is Illuminated Poems. This is written in tandem with Eric Drucker, a New York-based illustrator, graphic novelist. So Allen Ginsberg and him got together, and as you can tell, as I open it up, he illustrated parts of the poem. This is the Carl Solomon section. So he has here, you can see Carl Solomon in what looks like an institution. Many different ways of reading this poem.
Well, there most certainly is. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Literary Gladiators. Here's to 200 episodes and hopefully 200 plus more. Be sure to join us next time for another episode of Literary Gladiators, and for now, keep reading.